The bitter winter wind howled across the plains as Zarah Davenport clutched her thin woolen coat tighter around her shoulders, her eyes squinting against the blinding white landscape that stretched endlessly before her. She had never imagined that her journey to marry a man she'd never met would lead her to this desperate moment, lost in the vast emptiness of the Utah wilderness, with nightfall approaching, and the first heavy flakes of what promised to be a vicious blizzard beginning to fall. December 1885 had proven to be unforgiving in the Western Territories, particularly for a young woman from Philadelphia who had never experienced such savage weather. The stagecoach that was supposed to deliver her to Parowan, Utah, had been forced to stop at an outpost 30 miles short of her destination due to a broken wheel. The driver had assured her another coach would arrive by morning, but after waiting hours with no sign of help, Zarah had made what she now recognized as a terrible mistake. "It cannot be more than a day's walk," she had reasoned to herself, setting out with her small carpet bag and the directions provided by the station master. "Mr. Zimmerman is expecting his bride, and I shall not disappoint him on our very first appointment." Now, with the sun disappearing behind ominous storm clouds and her footprints already filling with fresh snow behind her, Zarah knew she had gravely misjudged both the distance and the weather. She had no idea where she was, which direction led to Parowan, or how she would survive the night in the open. Miles away, Levi Zachary stood on the porch of his modest ranch house on the outskirts of Parowan, Utah, staring at the darkening sky with growing concern. At 32, Levi had established himself as one of the most respected ranchers in the area, known for his uncanny ability to track anything from stray cattle to mountain lions across the rugged terrain. "Storms common and faster than expected," observed his ranch hand, Tom Miller, as he joined Levi on the porch. "Might be the worst we've seen in years." Levi nodded, his weathered face grim. "That stagecoach from Cedar City should have arrived hours ago. Jacob Zimmerman's bride-to-be was supposed to be on it." "The pass might be blocked already," Tom suggested. "Or they could have holed up at Weber's station to wait it out." Before Levi could respond, the sound of an approaching horse drew their attention. Through the thickening snowfall, they made out the figure of Jacob Zimmerman, his usually neat appearance disheveled from hard riding. "Zachary," Jacob called, reining his horse to a stop. "The coach broke down at Weber's. The driver just made it to town on horseback. Said my bride decided to walk to Parowan this morning against his advice. She hasn't arrived." Levi felt his stomach drop. "She tried to walk. In this weather, that's 30 miles of rough country." The driver gave her directions for the main road, but with this snow. Jacob's voice trailed off, his face pale with worry. "I've never even met her. She answered my advertisement 2 months ago, Zarah Davenport from Philadelphia. She's only 19. Levi was already moving, shouting orders to Tom. "Saddle Thunder and pack my winter gear. Bring me the long rifle and extra provisions." He turned back to Jacob. "What does she look like?" "I only have the photograph she sent," Jacob replied, handing over a small tintype. "Dark hair, small build. She said she'd be wearing a blue coat with a red scarf." The image showed a young woman with serious eyes and a tentative smile. Something in that hesitant expression stirred something in Levi, a protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. "I'll find her," Levi promised, studying the photograph before tucking it carefully into his coat pocket. "But you should know, this storm's looking to be a bad one. Could last 2, maybe 3 days. Please, Levi," Jacob pleaded. "I know we've had our differences, but you're the best tracker in the territory. She's coming all this way to be my wife. I can't let her die out there." Levi nodded curtly. The rivalry between him and Jacob went back years, competing for the same land, the same contracts, and once, the same woman. But none of that mattered now. A young woman's life hung in the balance. Within 20 minutes, Levi was mounted on his sturdy black stallion, Thunder, with supplies for several days strapped to his saddle. The snow was falling heavily now, the wind picking up strength as the temperature plummeted. "I'll head straight for Weber's station and look for her tracks from there," Levi told Jacob and the small group that had gathered to see him off. "If I don't find her within 2 days, I'll fire 3 shots. Send a search party if you can, but don't risk more lives if the storm worsens." With that, Levi spurred Thunder forward into the gathering storm, his mind focused on the nearly impossible task ahead. Finding a single woman in 30 miles of wilderness during a blizzard would test even his legendary tracking skills. But something in those hesitant eyes in the photograph wouldn't let him contemplate failure. As darkness enveloped the landscape completely, Zarah stumbled for perhaps the 100th time. Her feet were numb, her hands raw and red where they weren't protected by her thin gloves. The snow was nearly to her knees now, each step requiring tremendous effort. "I must find shelter," she gasped, her voice immediately torn away by the howling wind. Panic threatened to overwhelm her as she realized the complete folly of her decision to walk to Parowan. Would her body be found frozen come spring? Just another Eastern girl who had underestimated the brutal realities of the West through the swirling snow. She thought she detected a darker shadow, something more substantial than the endless white. Summoning her remaining strength, Zarah pushed forward toward what she prayed was not a hallucination. As she drew closer, she could make out the boxy shape of what appeared to be a small cabin or shelter of some kind. "Thank God," she whispered, tears of relief freezing on her cheeks as she lurched the final few yards to the structure. It was indeed a cabin abandoned and partially collapsed on one side, but still offering protection from the worst of the wind and snow. With trembling hands, Zarah pushed open the door, which groaned on rusted hinges. The interior was dark and musty, but blessedly still. After securing the door against the wind, she fumbled with numb fingers in her bag for the small tin of matches she carried. Striking one against the rough wood of what appeared to be a table, she looked around at her temporary sanctuary. The cabin was clearly long abandoned, a hunter's refuge or prospector's shelter, with a small stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with one chair, and a narrow cot covered in what remained of a moth-eaten blanket. Debris littered the floor, but to Zarah's immense relief, there was a small stack of firewood beside the hearth. With shaking hands, she arranged some of the smaller pieces in the fireplace, adding bits of what appeared to be an old newspaper to help catch the flame. It took 3 precious matches before the fire caught, but soon a small blaze was casting flickering light and meager warmth through the cabin. Zarah huddled close to the fire, removing her snow-caked boots and soaked stockings to inspect her feet. They were an alarming shade of white with patches of angry red, the beginning stages of frostbite. Remembering what she had read about cold exposure, she refrained from rubbing them directly and instead gradually moved them closer to the warmth of the fire. As some feeling painfully returned to her extremities, Zarah took stock of her situation. She had a little food in her bag, some bread, cheese, and dried apple slices she had purchased at Weber's station. The firewood would last the night if she was careful. If the storm cleared by morning, perhaps she could continue to Parowan, where Jacob Zimmerman waited for his mail-order bride. The thought of Jacob brought a fresh wave of anxiety. What would he think when she failed to arrive? Would he believe she had changed her mind? Their correspondence over the past months had been formal but promising. Jacob had described himself as a successful businessman with a fine house in Parowan, looking for a well-educated, God-fearing woman of good character, to be his wife. Zarah, facing the prospect of becoming a burden to her widowed aunt after her parents' deaths, had seen his advertisement as divine providence. Now, as she huddled by the feeble fire in an abandoned cabin, Zarah wondered if she had been foolish to place her future in the hands of a stranger in a land so wild and unforgiving. "I will not perish here," she told herself firmly, feeding another small log to the fire. "I've come too far to surrender now." With that declaration of determination, Zarah wrapped herself in her damp coat and the remains of the cot's blanket, curling as close to the fireplace as she dared. As exhaustion claimed her, her last thoughts were of the man she had traveled so far to marry, wondering if she would ever look upon his face. Levi pushed Thunder as hard as he dared through the growing storm, the powerful horse plowing through deepening drifts with determined strides. They reached Weber's station just as full darkness descended, the small outpost barely visible through the curtain of snow. "Zachary," called the station master, Burton Weber, as Levi dismounted. "Heard you might be coming this way. The girl left this morning, headed for Parowan." "Which direction did she go?" Levi asked, stamping snow from his boots as he entered the relative warmth of the station. "Told her to follow the main road," Weber replied, pointing to a rough map on the wall. "But with the snow already starting, who knows if she stayed on it." She seemed determined but woefully unprepared city girl, you could tell right away. Levi studied the map, his mind calculating distances and possible routes. "I'll set out at first light. No point trying to track in the dark with snow coming down this heavy." "Did you notice anything that might help me find her? Anything distinctive about her appearance or belongings?" Weber scratched his grizzled beard. "Blue coat, like they said. Red scarf. Small woman but walked with her chin up. Carried just one carpet bag, light brown with brass fittings. Oh, and she had boots that weren't meant for this weather, more like something a lady would wear in town." Levi nodded, committing these details to memory. "I'll need to leave Thunder here. Where she went, I'll need to be on foot for tracking." "You're welcome to one of my mules," Weber offered. "More sure-footed in this terrain." "Appreciate it," Levi replied. "I'll take the strongest one you've got." After securing the mule and arranging to leave Thunder in Weber's care, Levi accepted the station master's offer of a corner by the fire for the night. Sleep came fitfully as his mind raced through scenarios and strategies for the search ahead. Outside, the blizzard raged with increasing fury, and Levi couldn't help but wonder if the young woman had found shelter, or if she was enduring the full brunt of the storm's wrath. Morning brought no respite from the blizzard. If anything, the snow fell more heavily, driven by winds that cut like knives. Levi rose before dawn, checking his supplies and preparing for what he knew would be a brutal day of tracking. "You're crazy to go out in this," Weber remarked as he handed Levi a steaming cup of coffee. "No one could survive a night in the open in this weather." "She might have found shelter," Levi replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "I have to try." By the time the sky lightened to a dull gray, Levi was already a mile from the station, leading the sure-footed mule through snowdrifts that reached its belly in places. The main road to Parowan was completely obscured, but Levi's trained eyes searched for any irregularity in the snow's surface that might indicate human passage. It was nearly noon when he found the first sign, a barely perceptible depression where the snow had filled in what might have been a footprint. Crouching down, Levi carefully brushed away the fresh snow to reveal the distinct impression of a small boot. "Good girl," he murmured. "You stayed on the road longer than I expected." But the next print he found confirmed his fears. She had veered off the main road, perhaps disoriented by the whiteout conditions, or seeking a shortcut that didn't exist. The trail led toward a region of scattered pine forests and rocky outcroppings beautiful in summer but treacherous in winter. Levi tied the mule to a stout pine tree and continued on foot, moving slowly and methodically as he followed the increasingly sporadic signs of Zarah's passage. The woman had been walking in circles at one point, clearly lost, before continuing in a direction that would take her farther from Parowan rather than toward it. As the short winter day began to wane, desperation crept into Levi's search. The temperature was dropping rapidly with the approaching night, and if the young woman hadn't found shelter, she would not have survived the bitter cold. Then, just as he was considering making camp for the night, Levi spotted something red partially buried in the snow, a scarf caught on a branch, whipping violently in the wind. Hope surged through him as he retrieved the item. It matched the description of what Zarah had been wearing. With renewed determination, Levi pressed on, noting that the footprints were now deeper, suggesting she had been struggling through exhaustion. The tracks led toward a small valley where he knew several abandoned mining cabins were scattered. As darkness fell, Levi had to rely on his lantern, sweeping its feeble light across the snow in expanding arcs as he moved forward. The storm had finally begun to weaken, the wind dying down though snow still fell steadily. Then, through a break in the trees, he saw a faint glow of light from the window of a cabin nearly buried in snow. Summoning his last reserves of strength, Levi plowed through the deep drifts toward the light, his heart pounding with hope and urgency. Zarah was startled awake by a pounding at the cabin door. For a moment, she was disoriented, the events of the previous day flooding back as she registered the dying fire and the penetrating cold that had seeped into her very bones despite her proximity to the hearth. The pounding came again, more insistent this time. Fear and hope warred within her. It could be rescue or it could be danger. In these wild territories, one could never be certain. "Who's there?" she called, her voice hoarse from the dry air and disuse. "Levi Zachary from Parowan," came the reply, muffled by the thick door. "Jacob Zimmerman sent me to find you, Miss Davenport." Relief flooded through Zarah. Jacob had sent someone for her. With trembling hands, she pushed aside the chair she had braced against the door as a precaution and pulled it open. The man who stood before her was nothing like what she had expected. Tall and broad-shouldered, with several days' worth of dark beard shadowing a strong jaw, he looked more like a mountain man than a town-sent rescuer. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, widened as they took in her appearance. "You're alive," he breathed, the relief in his voice palpable. "When I saw how far you'd wandered from the road." "Mr. Zachary," Zarah said, suddenly aware of her disheveled state and attempting to straighten her wrinkled dress. "I cannot express my gratitude for your finding me. I fear I made a terrible misjudgment in attempting to walk to Parowan." A ghost of a smile touched Levi's lips. "That might be the understatement of the year, Miss Davenport. May I come in? The temperature's dropping fast out here." Zarah stepped back, allowing him to enter the small cabin. In the dim light of the dying fire, she could see that he carried a large pack and what appeared to be a rifle. "You've done well to survive the night," Levi commented, moving immediately to the fireplace and adding more wood from the dwindling pile. "Most folks from the East wouldn't have managed half as well." "Necessity is a strict teacher, Mr. Zachary," Zarah replied, watching as he skillfully built up the fire until it blazed with renewed vigor. "I had little choice but to adapt or perish." Levi turned to study her more carefully in the improved light. The photograph hadn't done her justice, he thought. Despite her ordeal, there was a quiet dignity in her posture, a resilience in her gaze that the tintype couldn't capture. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins, falling in waves around a face that was pale but determined. "Are you injured?" he asked, noting how she favored her right foot. "My feet suffered somewhat from the cold," Zarah admitted. "And I fear I may have twisted my ankle when I fell several times in the deeper snow." Levi nodded, already unpacking his provisions. "I brought medical supplies. Once you've eaten something warm, I'll have a look at your injuries." From his pack, he produced a small pot, dried meat, and some beans. Soon, a simple but hearty stew was simmering over the fire, filling the cabin with a tantalizing aroma that made Zarah realize just how hungry she was. "Mr. Zimmerman must be very concerned," she said as Levi handed her a tin cup filled with the steaming stew. A shadow seemed to pass over Levi's face. "Jacob's worried for your safety, yes. The whole town knows he was expecting his mail-order bride." Something in his tone made Zarah look at him more closely. "You don't approve of such arrangements," Levi shrugged, turning his attention to his own meal. "It's not my place to approve or disapprove. I just think it's a risky business, binding yourself to someone you've never met." "Not all of us have the luxury of choice, Mr. Zachary," Zarah replied with a slight edge to her voice. "Sometimes practical considerations must outweigh romantic notions." "Fair enough," Levi conceded. "And please call me Levi. If we're going to be stuck together until this storm passes, there's no need for formalities." Zarah nodded, warming her hands on the cup. "Then you must call me Zarah, and thank you again for finding me. I realize now I might not have survived another day." Levi's expression softened. "You're tougher than you look. But you're right, the second night is often when exposure claims its victims. You're lucky I'm a good tracker." "Is that your profession?" Zarah asked, genuinely curious about this rugged man who had come through a blizzard to rescue a stranger. "I ranch mostly," Levi replied. "Got a spread about 5 miles outside of Parowan, but I've been tracking since I was a boy, learned from my father and the Paiute who used to camp near our homestead." As they ate, Levi explained how the search had been organized, how he had followed her increasingly erratic trail through the storm, and how fortunate it was that she had found this particular cabin. "We're still a good 20 miles from Parowan," he told her. "And with your injuries and the conditions outside, we won't be going anywhere for at least a day, maybe 2. Zarah felt a flicker of anxiety. "Mr. Zimmerman will think I've abandoned our arrangement." "Jacob knows you're in good hands," Levi assured her, though something in his expression suggested there was more he wasn't saying. "Right now, we need to focus on getting you properly warmed and seeing to those feet of yours." After they had finished eating, Levi insisted on examining Zarah's feet and ankle. With surprising gentleness for such large hands, he carefully unwrapped her makeshift bandages. "You've got mild frostbite," he diagnosed, gently prodding the reddened skin. "Nothing permanent, thankfully. But this ankle is definitely sprained." From his pack, he produced a small jar of salve. "This will help with the frostbite. Old Paiute remedy works better than anything the doctor in Parowan could give you." As he applied the pungent-smelling ointment to her feet, Zarah couldn't help but notice the contrast between his weathered, capable hands and the careful, almost tender way he tended to her injuries. This was not a man accustomed to gentleness, yet he offered it to her without hesitation. "Have you lived in Parowan long?" she asked, partly to distract herself from the strange intimacy of the situation. "All my life," Levi replied, wrapping her ankle with a strip of clean cloth. "My father was one of the first settlers back in 51. Came with the Mormon expedition, though he wasn't of the faith himself." "And Mr. Zimmerman, has he been there long as well?" Levi's hands paused momentarily in their work. "Jacob came about 10 years ago, did well for himself, owns the mercantile, and has interests in some of the mines." "You don't sound particularly fond of him," Zarah observed, her perceptiveness surprising Levi. "We've had our differences," he admitted after a moment. "But that's water under the bridge. He's respected in town and he'll provide well for you." The conversation lapsed into silence as Levi finished tending to her injuries. Outside, the wind had died down completely, though snow continued to fall steadily. "You should get some rest," Levi said finally, moving away from her. "Take the cot. I'll sleep by the fire." Zarah wanted to protest that he should take the more comfortable resting place after his arduous journey to find her, but exhaustion was overtaking her, and she knew he was right about her needing proper rest to recover. "Thank you, Levi," she said simply, allowing him to help her to the cot. "For everything." As she drifted toward sleep, Zarah found herself studying the profile of her rescuer as he sat by the fire, his strong features illuminated by the dancing flames. There was something compelling about Levi Zachary, a quiet strength, an unassuming competence that spoke more eloquently than words. She wondered fleetingly what kind of woman would capture the heart of such a man, before sleep finally claimed her. Levi remained awake long after Zarah's breathing had deepened into the rhythms of sleep. He added logs to the fire occasionally, his thoughts troubled as he watched the young woman who had traveled so far to marry Jacob Zimmerman. There was something special about her, a resilience behind those expressive brown eyes, a dignity in the way she held herself despite her ordeal. Jacob didn't deserve her, but then, that wasn't Levi's concern. He had been tasked with finding Jacob's bride and returning her safely to Parowan. What happened after that was none of his business. Yet as the night deepened and the cabin grew quiet save for the crackling of the fire, Levi couldn't shake the feeling that finding Zarah Davenport might prove to be far more significant than simply tracking another lost traveler through the snow. Morning brought a temporary break in the storm. Levi awoke to find sunlight streaming through the cabin's single grimy window, creating patterns on the rough wooden floor. Zarah was still asleep on the cot, her dark hair spread across the makeshift pillow, her face peaceful in repose. Quietly, Levi rekindled the fire and stepped outside to assess their situation. The scene that greeted him was both beautiful and daunting, a pristine expanse of snow stretching in all directions, glittering in the early morning sunlight. The drifts around the cabin were waist-deep in places, and although the sky was clear for the moment, dark clouds on the western horizon promised more snow before the day was done. He had just finished bringing in more firewood from a small lean-to behind the cabin when Zarah stirred, her eyes opening slowly as she oriented herself to her surroundings. "Good morning," Levi greeted her. "How's the ankle feeling?" Zarah experimentally flexed her foot, wincing slightly. "Better than yesterday, but still quite painful. The swelling's down," Levi observed, glancing at her ankle, "but you won't be walking any significant distance for a few days at least." "Is the storm over?" Zarah asked, noting the sunlight in the cabin. "Just a lull," Levi replied, setting about preparing a simple breakfast from his provisions. "There's more coming. I can feel it in the air." As they ate dried beef and hardtack softened in hot coffee, Levi explained their options. "We could try to make it to my mule and then continue to Parowan today, but it would be risky. You'd have to ride and I'd have to lead on foot, if the storm catches us in the open." He left the implication hanging. "What's the alternative?" Zarah asked. "We wait out the next band of the storm here. It might mean another day or two in this cabin, but it's safer. Once the weather clears properly, we'll have a better chance of making it back without incident." Zarah considered this, her practical nature weighing the risks. "I defer to your judgment, Levi. You know this country and its weather far better than I." Levi nodded, secretly relieved. He hadn't relished the idea of forcing a march through deep snow with an injured woman, especially with more bad weather approaching. Then we stay put for now. I brought enough provisions for several days, and there's plenty of firewood. The decision made, they settled into a surprisingly comfortable routine. Levi ventured out periodically to check the weather and gather more wood, while Zarah insisted on making herself useful by organizing their meager supplies and taking over the cooking duties. As the morning progressed into afternoon, they found themselves sharing stories of their lives, Levi speaking of growing up on the frontier, learning to track and hunt from both his father and the native people, while Zarah told of her life in Philadelphia, the deaths of her parents from influenza 2 years prior, and her subsequent dependence on a reluctant aunt. She made it quite clear that at 20, I should be married and establishing my own household, Zarah explained as she stirred a pot of beans flavored with dried bacon from Levi's provisions. When I saw Mr. Zimmerman's advertisement in the newspaper, it seemed like Providence. And what did his letters tell you about him? Levi asked, curious about how Jacob had presented himself to this refined Eastern woman. That he was a successful businessman of 35, respected in the community, with a fine house in need of a mistress, Zarah replied. He wrote that he sought an educated woman who could help him achieve greater social standing in Parowan and eventually in Salt Lake City, where he hopes to expand his business interests. Something about her recitation struck Levi as oddly formal, lacking any mention of affection or compatibility. Did he write of anything besides his business ambitions? Zarah looked thoughtful. He mentioned enjoying music and having purchased a piano for his home, which I found appealing as I play a little. And he wrote that he wished for children's sons to inherit his business and daughters to bring gentility to his household. Levi tried to keep his expression neutral, though the description sounded more like a business prospectus than courtship. And you found this enticing. I found it honest, Zarah countered. Mr. Zimmerman made no pretense of romantic love. He offered security and position in exchange for a suitable wife. Many marriages begin on far less substantial foundations. True enough, Levi conceded, though he couldn't help but think Zarah deserved more than such a coldly practical arrangement. As predicted, the weather deteriorated rapidly in the late afternoon. The wind picked up again, driving fresh snow against the cabin with increasing fury until the view from the window was nothing but a white blur. We made the right choice staying put, Levi remarked, securing the door against the strengthening gale. Anyone caught out in this would be in serious trouble. Zarah nodded, a shudder passing through her as she recalled her own terrifying experience lost in the storm. I still cannot believe I was foolish enough to attempt such a journey on foot. I knew nothing of the country or its dangers. Determination can sometimes override good sense, Levi observed, not unkindly. Though I must say, finding this cabin showed good instincts. Many would have continued wandering until exhaustion claimed them. It was more luck than instinct, Zarah admitted. I was praying for any shelter when I spotted the outline through the snow. As evening approached, they shared another simple meal, making the most of Levi's provisions. The cabin had grown surprisingly cozy, the fire crackling cheerfully against the backdrop of the storm's fury outside. "Tell me about your ranch," Zarah prompted as they sat before the fire, sipping the last of the coffee. "Is it very large, 500 acres?" Levi replied with quiet pride. "Not the biggest spread in the territory, but the land's good. Started with just 50 acres my father left me and built it up over the years. Got about 100 head of cattle now, and I breed horses some of the best in the territory, if I do say so myself." "No Mrs. Zachary to share in your success?" Zarah asked, then immediately flushed at her boldness. "Forgive me, that was terribly forward." Levi's expression grew distant. "There was someone once, Sarah Miller. We were to be married 5 years ago." Something in his tone made Zarah hesitate to press further, but after a moment, Levi continued of his own accord. "She fell ill with mountain fever 2 weeks before the wedding. Nothing the doctor tried could save her." His voice was steady, but the old pain was evident in his eyes. "After that, I threw myself into building the ranch. Easier to exhaust yourself with work than to dwell on what might have been." "I'm so sorry," Zarah said softly, impulsively reaching out to touch his hand. "Losing someone you love leaves a wound that never truly heals." Levi looked at her with newfound understanding. "You speak from experience." "My parents," Zarah confirmed. "They were everything to me. When the influenza took them, it was as if the foundation of my world had crumbled." They sat in companionable silence after that, two souls who had known loss finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. As the fire burned lower and the hour grew late, Zarah found herself reluctant to end the evening, though exhaustion pulled at her. "You should rest," Levi finally said, noting her struggle to keep her eyes open. "Your body's still recovering from your ordeal." This time, Zarah didn't protest when he insisted she take the cot again. As she settled beneath the blankets he had supplemented with his own coat for added warmth, she watched him arrange his bedroll near the fire. "Levi," she said sleepily, using his first name without the hesitation she had shown earlier. "Thank you for finding me. I'm beginning to think getting lost in that blizzard might have been a strange sort of blessing." Before he could respond, her eyes had closed, and within moments, her breathing had deepened into sleep. Levi sat for a long time watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest, troubled by the growing certainty that delivering Zarah safely to Jacob Zimmerman would be far more difficult than he had anticipated, not because of the weather or the challenging journey ahead, but because of the unexpected feeling stirring within his own heart. The storm raged through the night and into the next day, trapping them in the small cabin for another 24 hours. Far from being tedious, however, the time passed with surprising ease as Levi and Zarah discovered they had much to talk about. Zarah spoke of her love of books, describing the small library her father had maintained in their Philadelphia home and how she had read every volume multiple times after his death. "What kinds of books do you enjoy?" she asked Levi, curious if this rugged rancher shared her passion for literature. To her surprise, Levi reached into his pack and produced a worn copy of the Iliad. "I never travel without something to read," he explained, somewhat sheepishly. "My mother taught school before she married my father. She insisted I receive a proper education, even out here on the frontier." "Homer," Zarah exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. "My father had this very edition. I must have read it a dozen times." What began as a casual conversation about books soon deepened into discussions of philosophy, history, and politics topics Zarah had never expected to explore with a frontier rancher. Levi revealed himself to be not only well-read but thoughtful and articulate, with opinions that challenged and intrigued her. By the afternoon of their second day in the cabin, Zarah found herself wondering how she had formed such a quick connection with this man, who had been a complete stranger just days before. There was an ease to their interactions, a natural rhythm to their conversations that she had never experienced with anyone else. For his part, Levi was equally surprised by how comfortable he felt in Zarah's company. Since Sarah's death, he had kept mostly to himself, interacting with others only as necessary for business or the occasional social obligation. Yet with Zarah, words came easily, and the silences between them were comfortable rather than strained. As evening approached once again, the storm finally began to abate. The wind died down to occasional gusts, and the snow fell more gently, no longer driven horizontally against the cabin. "I think we'll be able to leave tomorrow," Levi announced after checking outside. "The worst has passed." Zarah felt an unexpected pang at his words. "That's good news," she said, trying to infuse her voice with appropriate enthusiasm. "Mr. Zimmerman must be very worried by now." "Jacob knows you're safe," Levi reminded her. "I told him I'd bring you back when the weather allowed." They prepared their evening meal in a subdued mood, both aware that their unusual interlude was coming to an end. As they ate, Zarah found herself studying Levi more carefully than before, noting the strength in his hands as he sliced dried meat, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled, the quiet confidence with which he moved. "What will happen when we reach Parowan?" she asked suddenly, setting down her tin plate. "With Mr. Zimmerman, I mean." Levi looked at her steadily. "That depends on what you want to happen. You traveled all this way to marry him, but circumstances have changed," Zarah finished for him, her voice soft. "I have no right to interfere in your arrangements," Levi said carefully. "Jacob is offering you security, position in the community, things that aren't easy to come by, especially for a woman alone." "And what of happiness?" Zarah asked, holding his gaze. "What of companionship and understanding? Are those luxuries one must sacrifice for security?" Levi set aside his own plate, his expression troubled. "Zarah, I don't want to influence your decision. You hardly know me. 3 days in a snowbound cabin isn't enough to base your future on." "Perhaps not," she agreed. "But it has been enough to make me question whether the path I chose in Philadelphia is still the one I wish to follow." The tension between them was palpable, filled with unspoken possibilities and concerns. Finally, Levi sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We should both get some rest," he suggested. "Tomorrow will be a long day, and your ankle, while improved, will still make travel difficult." Zarah nodded, recognizing his retreat for what it was, not rejection but caution. Levi was right. They barely knew each other, and she had made a commitment to Jacob Zimmerman. Rushing into a new attachment would be foolish, regardless of how strongly she felt drawn to Levi. That night, as she lay on the cot staring at the shadowed ceiling, Zarah's mind was a whirl of conflicting thoughts. She had come west seeking security and purpose, willing to enter a marriage of convenience to achieve those goals. Now, having met Levi Zachary, she found herself yearning for something more, a connection based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than practical considerations alone. Across the room, Levi was equally restless, his bedroll suddenly uncomfortable as his thoughts refused to quiet. He had no right to come between Zarah and Jacob, no claim on this woman who had entered his life by mere chance and circumstance. Yet the thought of delivering her to Jacob's doorstep, of watching her become another man's wife, filled him with a hollow ache he hadn't expected. Dawn brought clear skies and brilliant sunshine that transformed the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling spectacle. After a quick breakfast, they packed their few belongings and prepared to leave the cabin that had been their sanctuary. "We'll need to move slowly," Levi cautioned as he helped Zarah wrap her ankle securely. "The snow's deep, and it'll be hard going until we reach the mule." "I'll manage," Zarah assured him, testing her weight on the injured ankle. It hurt, but the pain was manageable. "I'm stronger than I look." "That I already know," Levi replied with a smile that warmed her more than the fire had. The journey to where Levi had left the mule was arduous. Levi broke trail, stomping down the snow to create a path for Zarah to follow. Even with his assistance, every step was a challenge for her, the deep snow concealing uneven ground that threatened her balance. They had been traveling for nearly 2 hours when they crested a small ridge, and Zarah got her first clear view of the valley below. In the distance, partially obscured by pine forests and rolling hills, she could make out what appeared to be buildings the outskirts of Parowan. "Is that?" she began, pointing toward the distant settlement. "Parowan," Levi confirmed. "We're still a good 15 miles away, though. We won't reach it today, even if we find the mule quickly." As if on cue, they heard a braying sound from a copse of pines to their left. "Speaking of which," Levi said with a grin, altering their course toward the sound. The mule was exactly where Levi had left it, pawing at the snow to reach the grass beneath, the shelter of the pines having protected it from the worst of the storm. "Hello, old girl," Levi greeted the animal, checking it over carefully. "Seems you weathered the storm just fine." With the mule now available, their progress improved significantly. Levi helped Zarah into the saddle, adjusting the stirrups for her shorter legs before taking the lead rope and continuing their journey. They traveled steadily through the day, stopping occasionally for brief rests and to share the last of their provisions. The sun was warm despite the cold air, beginning to melt the top layer of snow and making the going somewhat easier. As evening approached, Levi guided them to another small cabin, this one in better repair than the first, clearly used regularly by hunters or travelers. "We'll stop here for the night," he decided, helping Zarah dismount. "It's only about 7 miles to Parowan from here. We'll easily make it by mid-morning tomorrow." Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean, with a proper bed instead of a cot, a table with 2 chairs, and a well-maintained fireplace. Levi quickly got a fire going while Zarah explored their temporary lodging. "This is practically luxurious compared to our previous accommodations," she remarked, running a hand over the handmade quilt that covered the bed. "It's maintained by the community," Levi explained, "for travelers caught between towns or during hunting season." They prepared a simple meal from supplies stored in the cabin: dried beans, salt pork, and even a few potatoes that had been kept from freezing in a root cellar beneath the floor. As they ate, Zarah found herself growing increasingly quiet, her thoughts turning to what awaited her in Parowan. "You're worried about tomorrow," Levi observed, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. "I'm uncertain," Zarah admitted. "About many things." Levi studied her across the table, his expression somber. "Zarah, I need to tell you something about Jacob." "Something I should have mentioned earlier." A sense of foreboding swept through her. "What is it?" "Jacob's first wife died 3 years ago," Levi began carefully. "Consumption. Before that there were rumors." "What kind of rumors?" Zarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "That he wasn't always kind to her. That sometimes she would appear in town with bruises she couldn't explain." Levi's jaw tightened. "Nothing was ever proven and many dismissed it as idle gossip, but I knew Martha before she married Jacob. She was a lively, confident woman. By the end, she was a shadow of herself." Zarah felt cold despite the warmth of the fire. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I didn't want to influence your decision based on unproven allegations," Levi replied honestly. "And because I wasn't sure if my own feelings about you were coloring my judgment." The admission hung in the air between them, Levi's indirect acknowledgement of his growing attachment to her making Zarah's heart race. "What would you have me do?" she asked finally, searching his face for guidance. "I would have you make your own choice," Levi said firmly. "But with all the facts before you, Jacob Zimmerman can offer you material comfort and social standing. What he may not be able to offer is kindness, respect, or the kind of partnership that makes a marriage worthwhile." Zarah rose from the table, moving to stand by the window where moonlight spilled across the snow outside. "And what of alternatives?" I have no family to return to in Philadelphia, no means of supporting myself here in the West. Levi stood as well, though he kept his distance, respecting her need for space to think. There are always alternatives for those with courage to seek them. She turned to face him then, her expression resolute. Would you be direct with me, Levi? If there is something you wish to say, please say it plainly. For a moment, Levi hesitated, the caution of years of solitude warring with the intensity of feelings that had developed in mere days. Then, making his decision, he crossed the room to stand before her. I have no right to ask anything of you, he began, his voice low and earnest. We've known each other only days and under extraordinary circumstances. But in those days, I've come to admire your courage, your intelligence, your resilience. I find myself dreading tomorrow because it means watching you walk into Jacob Zimmerman's house and out of my life. Zarah's breath caught in her throat. What are you saying, Levi? I'm saying that if you wanted a different path, one that might begin with more modest circumstances, but offer the prospect of genuine partnership, I would be honored to walk it with you. He took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. I'm not proposing marriage, not yet. That would be premature for both of us. But I am suggesting that you don't have to honor your arrangement with Jacob if your heart tells you it's not right. Tears welled in Zarah's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming emotion. I came west seeking security, willing to accept a loveless marriage to achieve it. I never expected to find someone who would see me, truly see me, and value what they found. Is that a yes? Levi asked, a hint of his rare smile appearing. It's a beginning, Zarah replied, squeezing his hands. A beginning I never dared hope for. The distance between them closed naturally, their first kiss gentle and questioning, a promise rather than a demand. When they parted, the connection between them felt both new and somehow ancient, as if they had been moving toward this moment their entire lives. We should still go to Parowan tomorrow, Zarah said after a moment. I owe Mr. Zimmerman the courtesy of explaining my decision in person. Levi nodded, respect for her integrity deepening his admiration. We'll face it together. That night, they slept separately, Levi insisting Zarah take the bed while he made do with his bedroll by the fire. But something fundamental had changed between them. A commitment made without formal words, a future glimpsed through the window of unexpected circumstances. Morning brought a renewed sense of purpose as they prepared for the final leg of their journey to Parowan. Zarah's ankle had improved enough that she could walk short distances without severe pain, though Levi insisted she ride the mule for most of the way. As they traveled, they discussed practical matters, where Zarah would stay in Parowan while they became better acquainted, what skills she might use to support herself initially, how they would navigate the inevitable gossip that would arise from her decision not to marry Jacob. The widow Jenkins runs a respectable boarding house, Levi told her. She's fair-minded and doesn't tolerate gossip under her roof. You could stay there while you get your bearings. And what of employment? Zarah asked, practical despite her excitement about their new understanding. I won't be dependent on charity or your assistance. The school's been without a proper teacher since Miss Wilson left to get married last spring, Levi replied. With your education, you'd be a natural candidate for the position. The conversation flowed easily between them, plans and possibilities emerging naturally as they made their way through the snow-covered landscape. By mid-morning, they had reached the outskirts of Parowan, the small frontier town coming to life with daily activities despite the recent storm. Word of our arrival will spread quickly, Levi warned as they approached the main street. Are you prepared for the attention? Zarah straightened in the saddle, lifting her chin with determination. I've faced worse than curious stares. Lead on, Mr. Zachary. Their entrance into town did indeed draw attention. People emerged from the mercantile, the blacksmith shop, and several houses to watch their progress, whispers following in their wake. Levi nodded greetings to several townsfolk, but kept the mule moving steadily toward their destination. Jacob Zimmerman's house stood at the far end of the main street, a large two-story structure painted white with green trim, clearly one of the finest residences in Parowan. As they approached, the front door opened, and Jacob himself appeared on the porch, alerted by some neighbor of their arrival. "Miss Davenport," he called, hurrying down the steps. "Thank God you're safe. When Zachary didn't return, I feared the worst." Jacob was a tall, thin man in his late 30s, with receding brown hair and a meticulously groomed mustache. His clothes were of fine quality, and a gold watch chain gleamed across his waistcoat. His expression of concern seemed genuine enough, though his eyes darted between Zarah and Levi with a hint of suspicion. "Mr. Zimmerman," Zarah acknowledged, allowing Levi to help her down from the mule. "I owe you an apology for the worry I must have caused." "Nonsense, my dear. The important thing is that you're here now." Jacob moved as if to take her arm, but Zarah subtly stepped back, maintaining her position beside Levi. "Come inside. You must be exhausted from your ordeal." "Actually, Mr. Zimmerman," Zarah began, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach, "I would like to speak with you privately if I may." Jacob's gaze sharpened, taking in the way Zarah stood close to Levi, the protective stance the rancher had assumed beside her. "Of course," he said, his cordial tone taking on a brittle quality. "Please come in." "I'll be right here," Levi told Zarah quietly, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze out of Jacob's sight. With a nod of acknowledgement, Zarah followed Jacob into his house. The interior was as impressive as the exterior had promised, well furnished with Eastern carpets, polished furniture, and oil paintings in gilded frames. A piano stood in the corner of the parlor, just as Jacob had promised in his letters. "Please sit down," Jacob invited, indicating a brocade-covered settee. "May I offer you tea, or perhaps something stronger after your journey?" "No, thank you," Zarah declined, sitting with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. "Mr. Zimmerman, I must be direct with you. During my journey and subsequent rescue, circumstances have arisen that have caused me to reconsider our arrangement." Jacob's pleasant expression froze. "Reconsider? In what way?" "I cannot in good conscience proceed with our marriage plans," Zarah stated plainly. "While I am grateful for the opportunity you offered and the resources you expended to bring me west, I must follow my heart in this matter." "Your heart?" Jacob repeated, his voice taking on an edge. "And does your heart now point toward Levi Zachary? Is that it?" "A few days alone with him in the wilderness, and suddenly our contract means nothing." Zarah bristled at his tone. "There was no contract, Mr. Zimmerman. There was an agreement between two adults that could be reconsidered by either party. As for Mr. Zachary, he has been nothing but honorable throughout this entire situation." Jacob laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Honorable? He's wanted what was mine since we were young men. First Sarah Miller, now you." The mention of Sarah startled Zarah. "Sarah Miller?" "Levi's fiancée who died." "His fiancée after she was my sweetheart," Jacob corrected bitterly. "She chose him over me, though God saw fit to take her before they could wed, and now history repeats itself." Understanding dawned on Zarah the source of the tension between the two men, the reason Jacob had sent Levi to find her despite their apparent dislike for each other. "You sent him to test him," she realized aloud, "to see if he would bring me back to you." Jacob didn't deny it. "I didn't expect him to seduce my bride along the way." "He did nothing of the sort," Zarah said firmly, rising to her feet. "Mr. Zachary behaved with perfect propriety throughout our time together. The connection that developed between us was based on mutual respect and understanding, things I now realize were missing from our correspondence. Jacob's face darkened. So you'll throw away security and position for some emotional fancy? For a ranch hand who can barely keep his property from foreclosure. Is that true? Zarah asked, doubt creeping in despite her resolve. Is Levi in financial trouble? Ask him yourself, Jacob challenged. Ask him about the banknotes coming due, about the cattle he lost in last winter's freeze. Ask him if he can offer you anything close to what I can provide. Zarah hesitated, uncertainty warring with her newfound feelings for Levi. Then, remembering the rumors about Jacob's first wife, she straightened her shoulders. Material comfort isn't everything, Mr. Zimmerman. And I believe Levi Zachary to be an honorable man who would not make promises he couldn't keep. You're a fool, Jacob spat, his cordial mask dropping completely. He'll ruin you, and when he does, don't come crawling back to me. I won't, Zarah assured him, moving toward the door. Good day, Mr. Zimmerman. I wish you well in finding a wife better suited to your requirements. She left the house with her head high, despite the trembling in her limbs. Levi was waiting where she had left him, tension evident in every line of his body until he saw her emerge. Are you all right? He asked immediately, moving to her side. I am now, she replied, taking his arm for support, her injured ankle protesting the exertion of the confrontation. Though there are things we need to discuss. Aware of the many eyes watching from various vantage points around the town square, Levi led Zarah toward the boarding house he had mentioned earlier. Whatever Jacob told you, he began. We'll talk about it later, Zarah interrupted gently. For now, I think I need to secure lodging and perhaps rest a bit. The widow Jenkins proved to be exactly as Levi had described, a no-nonsense woman of about 60 with sharp eyes, but a kind smile. She showed Zarah to a small but clean room on the second floor of her well-kept boarding house, asking few questions beyond the practical matters of payment and meals. Dinner's at 6 sharp, she informed Zarah. Breakfast between 7 and 8. I don't allow gentlemen callers in the rooms, but Mr. Zachary is welcome to visit with you in the parlor during respectable hours. Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins, Zarah replied, grateful for the woman's matter-of-fact approach. That's very reasonable. Once the widow had departed, Levi helped Zarah settle her few belongings, the carpet bag that had survived the blizzard, and a few essentials he had purchased from the mercantile on their way to the boarding house. Now, Zarah said, once they were seated in the parlor with cups of Mrs. Jenkins's strong tea, tell me about the financial troubles Jacob mentioned. Levi's expression tightened, but he didn't evade the question. It's not as dire as he likely made it sound, but yes, the ranch has been struggling. Last winter was hard, lost nearly 30 head of cattle to the cold and disease, and there's a bank note coming due in the spring that I'm not sure I can meet. Why didn't you tell me? Zarah asked, not accusingly but with genuine concern. Because I didn't want you choosing between a man with money and a man without, Levi answered honestly. If you were going to choose me over Jacob, I wanted it to be for the right reasons. Zarah considered this, appreciating his integrity even while worrying about the practical implications. What will happen if you can't meet the bank note? I might lose the south pasture, about 100 acres. It wouldn't ruin me, but it would set me back significantly. Levi ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Zarah had come to recognize as a sign of his frustration. I've been working on a breeding program with my horses that I think will pay off eventually, but it takes time. Time that the bank isn't willing to give, Zarah concluded. She was quiet for a moment, thinking. Mr. Zimmerman seemed to believe there was history between you regarding Sarah Miller. Levi's expression softened at the mention of his former fiancée. Sarah and Jacob courted briefly before she and I became involved. He's never forgiven me for that, though it was entirely Sarah's choice. She told me Jacob was too controlling, too focused on appearances. Like Martha, Zarah murmured, referring to Jacob's first wife. Yes, Levi agreed solemnly. Though I have no proof of what happened in that marriage, only suspicions and rumors. They sat in thoughtful silence for a few moments, each processing the implications of all that had transpired. Finally, Zarah reached across the small table to take Levi's hand. I meant what I said yesterday, she told him firmly. I want to see where this path leads us, financial difficulties and all, but I also meant what I said about not being dependent. I intend to apply for the teaching position you mentioned. Relief and admiration washed across Levi's face. You're an extraordinary woman, Zarah Davenport. I'm a practical woman, she countered with a smile, who happens to believe that some things are worth more than material security. Over the following weeks, Zarah settled into life in Parowan with surprising ease. The school board, desperate for a qualified teacher, hired her almost immediately upon reviewing her credentials and educational background. The modest salary they offered, combined with room and board at Mrs. Jenkins's establishment, provided Zarah with the independence she valued so highly. Her relationship with Levi developed gradually, with proper courtship practices observed under Mrs. Jenkins's watchful eye. They attended church together on Sundays, took chaperoned walks through town, and occasionally rode out to Levi's ranch when Zarah's teaching schedule permitted. The ranch house was modest compared to Jacob Zimmerman's impressive dwelling, but Zarah found herself drawn to its warmth and character. Built by Levi's father and expanded over the years, it reflected the practical nature of frontier life while still offering comfort and even touches of beauty like the handcrafted bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes that occupied a place of honor in the main room. As spring approached, Levi worked tirelessly to meet the looming banknote deadline. He sold several of his best young horses for good prices, took on extra work breaking horses for neighboring ranches, and even considered selling a small parcel of his land that held little agricultural value but might appeal to a speculator. Zarah, meanwhile, had become a respected figure in the community through her work at the school. The children responded well to her teaching methods, and even initially skeptical parents had to admit that the Eastern lady was bringing a level of education to Parowan that the town had not previously enjoyed. One evening in early April, as they sat on the porch of Mrs. Jenkins's boarding house enjoying the mild spring air, Levi brought up a subject they had been circling for weeks. "I've been thinking," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant, about the future." Zarah's heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "As have I." "The banknote's due next week," Levi continued. "I'm still about $50 short, but Weber at the station offered me a job delivering a string of horses to Salt Lake City that should cover the difference." "That's wonderful news," Zarah said warmly, genuinely relieved for him. "The thing is," Levi pressed on, "I've been waiting to get my finances in better order before speaking, but I realize now that life doesn't always allow for perfect timing." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Zarah Davenport, these past months have been the happiest of my life. I know we still have much to learn about each other, but I'm certain of one thing: I want to build a life with you, if you'll have me." Tears welled in Zarah's eyes as Levi reached into his pocket and produced a small silver ring, simple but beautifully crafted, with a small turquoise stone set in its center. "It was my mother's," he explained, his voice thick with emotion. "My father gave it to her when they decided to make their life here in the West. I can't offer you the luxury Jacob Zimmerman could have provided, but I promise you a partnership based on respect, honesty, and love." "Yes," Zarah said simply, her heart too full for elaborate speeches. "Yes, Levi Zachary, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Zarah felt as though her journey had come full circle. She had traveled west seeking security through marriage to a stranger, only to find something far more valuable, a love born in the most unlikely of circumstances, tested by hardship, and strengthened by shared values and mutual respect. Their wedding took place in June, a simple ceremony in Parowan's small church, attended by most of the townspeople. Mrs. Jenkins had taken Zarah under her wing, helping her create a wedding dress from fine fabric ordered specially from Salt Lake City. Levi, dressed in his best suit, waited at the altar with an expression of such joy and disbelief that several of the town's matrons were seen dabbing at their eyes before the ceremony even began. Jacob Zimmerman was conspicuously absent, having departed for business in Salt Lake City shortly after Zarah's rejection of his proposal. Rumors suggested he was courting another mail-order bride, though no one could confirm this. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to Levi's ranch, where tables had been set up in the yard beneath cottonwood trees just coming into full leaf. The women of the community had outdone themselves with food, and Tom Miller had organized several of the ranch hands to create a dance floor where fiddle music soon had couples twirling beneath lantern light as the summer evening deepened. "Happy, Mrs. Zachary?" Levi asked as they took a moment away from their guests, standing on the porch of what was now their shared home. "Completely," Zarah replied, still marveling at how right her new name felt. "Though I must admit, when I first set out from Philadelphia, I never imagined this would be my destination." "Getting lost in that blizzard was the luckiest wrong turn you ever took," Levi said with a smile, drawing her close. "And following my footprints was the most important tracking you ever did," Zarah countered, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. From the yard came calls for the bride and groom to return for the next dance. With laughter and linked hands, they rejoined their community, no longer the Eastern lady and the Western rancher, but simply Levi and Zarah Zachary. Their separate journeys now merged into one shared path. In the years that followed, the Zachary Ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Levi's horse breeding program eventually gained recognition throughout the territory, while Zarah continued teaching until the birth of their first child, a son they named Daniel after Zarah's father. 2 years later, twins James and Rebecca joined the family, followed by another son, William, 3 years after that. The small ranch house expanded along with the family, with Levi adding rooms as needed and Zarah creating a home that blended Eastern refinement with Western practicality. The bookshelf in the main room grew ever more crowded as they added to their shared collection, reading aloud to their children in the evenings just as Levi's mother had read to him. On particularly cold winter nights, when snow piled high outside their windows and the wind howled across the plains, Levi and Zarah would often retell the story of how they met of a desperate young woman lost in a blizzard, and the determined tracker who found her against all odds. The children never tired of hearing it, especially the part where their father had followed their mother's nearly invisible footprints for 2 days through the worst storm in years. "You make it sound like a grand adventure," Zarah would tease her husband after the children had been tucked into bed. "When in reality, I was terrified and you were probably cursing my foolishness with every step." "It was a grand adventure," Levi would insist, pulling her close beside the fire. "The beginning of the greatest one of my life." And Zarah, thinking of how far she had come from that frightened young woman struggling through the snow, would have to agree. Getting lost had led her precisely where she was meant to be all along. In Parowan, the story of Levi and Zarah Zachary became something of a local legend, proof that sometimes the greatest blessings arrive disguised as misfortune, and that love can be found in the most unexpected circumstances. Whenever winter storms blew across the valley, old-timers would remind younger generations of how Levi Zachary had tracked his future wife through a blizzard for 2 days, following footprints that most men wouldn't even have seen. Takes a special kind of determination, they would say sagely, to find what truly matters in this life. And on the Zachary Ranch, where laughter and learning filled the expanded homestead and children grew strong under the nurturing guidance of parents who truly cherished each other, no one understood that truth more deeply than Levi and Zarah themselves.